This is the storage container that we store a lot of our costumes in. And this thing, I've been helping people kind of clear out their excess cranial matter and got too much on the mind. I can help them with them, or I give them a morning scramble. Miss, you want to step forward? We'll give you a little morning scramble. You look like you've had a stressful day. Why don't you turn around and face the camera? So you've had a rough day? Tough drive up the hill?
Yeah.
Just relax a little. We'll put the brain scrambler on you and give you just a little bit of, oh yeah, a little bit of left brain, a little bit of right brain. How's that feel?
Good.
Very, very good. Now, I noticed that you've got a little excess gray matter. We're going to remove some of that, just so we can, and then we'll put it in our brain evacuating canister back here, and then we can share it with other people here around us, some of those, who are lacking a little in the cranial department. That way it spreads the good vibe and helps to create the one mind that we're all after here. Oh, there we go. How's that feel?
Feels much better.
I thought so.
I think Brett played dress up all the time. So when we were kids, there's lots of photos of him playing dress up with cowboys, cowboy hats and guns and cowboy boots, and lots of pictures of him as a kid with army helmets on and big army jackets that he'd get from the Army Navy store.
It's a few years old headpieces, and you'll notice the ship on top and the globe, and if you can see the globe on the front. But when I grew up in Los Altos, it was a pretty quiet little town. It definitely, the Silicon Valley was just barely getting going, so it wasn't a very wealthy place. The kids just roamed around in gangs, and we biked all over the place together.
They took 2 bikes, and they somehow they put them in this framework, and they built a tank around the 2 bikes, all made of wood, and it was so it was going to be propelled by 2 cyclists, and the tank was quite large. In fact, it filled the garage, so it was as large as a station wagon, if you guys know what that is, like a giant car. And he and his buddies would get into this tank, and a couple people would be riding it, and then there was a place for other kids to stand up into this turret, and they had mounted slingshots onto the top of it, and so they'd go to the berry bushes and rocks and all the rocks, and they'd put them in these little trays around the turret, and there would be this giant tank being ridden down the street with kids in it, shooting rocks and berries at pretty much everything. So he was pretty creative that way, and I think that's just how he did most things. They were pretty much on a grand scale.
It was kind of quiet and kind of boring. As I got into high school, I started feeling like it was really boring, and there's really nothing going on there.
Brett is very, very smart, very, very intelligent, and got really bored in high school. And he didn't like it because he was so bored. And I think his path was that he was tired of people telling him what to do, and he was bored because the work wasn't very challenging. And he graduated from high school early just to get out. And then he ran away from home. He didn't really run away, but he left home. I suspect when I was younger that he and my parents wanted to divorce each other. And I know he caused quite a bit of frustration in my parents' life. And frustration, I think, is an understatement, because he was so independent and he wanted to do his own thing, and he didn't want to play by the rules, and he didn't want to be part of our society. That it was really difficult, I think, for them. Maybe it was an act of self-preservation to leave town and go find something else, or maybe it was just wanting to escape home.
It was the summer after my junior year, so I was your age, and myself and 3 friends got in a van and drove to Oregon, to Eugene. We drove all night, almost to Canada. We ended up in like Montana somewhere. And we didn't have a plan, we were just going. And we were listening to Some Girls had just come out, Rolling Stones. Like Miss You. Lord, I miss you. And then we picked up a hitchhiker in Canada, this guy Steve, this old bearded, he wasn't that old actually, but he's bearded and looked like a mountain man type. And later my friends went home and I decided to stay in Canada for the summer. And hitchhiked around and I picked apples for money, and then I went to fight a forest fire.
When he came back, to me, he felt like a different person. He felt like he had changed. He appeared to be more engaged, at least with me, and had maybe figured out himself a little bit more, maybe put things into perspective. I think he and my dad have probably made amends. They came together when they were building my dad's house that he and my mom were going to retire in. And so Brett and my dad built the house together. And I think that was really important. And they lived on the property together when they were building it. And it was, they each had a trailer that they lived in. And so they had their own little separate spaces, but they spent, you know, I don't know, 12, 20 hours a day together. So, and I think they had just a mutual respect for each other's talents. He's really sort of taken on this role that I bet he never expected he would take on. In fact, it probably, when he was a teenager, the idea of that probably repelled him. The traditional path was really not a good one for him. There's a beautiful picture of him that was taken at Burning Man a number of years ago, and it was published in a magazine, and he was on stilts walking through the desert, and he had made these wings that he wore like a backpack out of copper pipe, and it was beautiful wings, and he had somehow rigged it so there was gas flowing through them so he could light them on fire, so they were like these flaming wings. And then he had over his head were these little bells, and so he was walking through the desert with flaming wings on stilts and just ding, bong, no talking, nothing. And I think that was just a perfect statement of who he is.
Because Brett has always been a bit avant-garde and you might say radical in pursuit of creativity and counterculture. He discovered it and was a participant, an annual participant, many, many times from the pretty early days. originally, I probably would have considered that a pretty wacky, way out, fringe, weird activity. But as I grew and could appreciate more of that artistic sensibility, I eventually went to the festival, and it was so remarkable to me that I went back. I've been 4 times now, I guess, and he was a real early starter, and probably would be considered, you know, definitely an early adopter of that culture and that festival.
Well, Stilting with Brett it's really fun. It's totally ridiculous. But I mean, like, it's so funny because normally he's like a really soft-spoken, easygoing guy, and then when he's Stilting, he just becomes like completely outrageous, so funny, like life of the party. He always has like swarms of people around him because he's always just like saying the most ridiculous things and just like hilariously harassing poor people and stuff. It's totally funny though.
Depending on what situation we're in, anywhere from a few to 20 or 30 people sort of gathered around us as we move through the crowd, and then either some will be particularly curious and interested and come up and ask us questions, or some people are kind of sly and they're just kind of looking, and you can tell they're appreciating it. And then some of the little kids especially, you can tell like they're off to the side and they're just like, wow. And then a lot of those I like to grab and bring over and like bring them in and make them feel like really like work the magic with them.
I think he stilts because it's different, and he's just so different from lots of other people. And I think he can make a statement. I think it sets him apart.
Looking for my coat that goes with this. This is Sabrina's coat. I don't know if you can see the detail here, but it's quite exquisite silks and velvets and buttons and baubles, and we use a lot of baubles to make things beautiful and wacky. We're in these crazy costumes and interact with the crowd and are just kind of silly and beautiful mostly, and I really, really enjoy doing that, because when I'm on stilts I get to be somebody completely different. I'm almost not a human anymore. So I can get away with being ridiculous and a little bit rude and very silly, and can really touch people's hearts in a way that I can't if I'm just on the ground. Stilting changes everything, and the costumes change everything. And that is actually about my favorite thing to do, is to inhabit that space of playing with people as that person, that other part of my person. So I was just thinking as I was putting this stuff away that there's this part of me that thinks that everyone has outfits like this that they go out in and meet the world in and have social exchanges in, and I guess really they don't. I'm very lucky to be able to do this, but I think everyone should have a way to meet the world from a different place other than their normal everyday reality, and they should be able to jump into a crazy outfit or a different something in some way to interact with their world, or step out of their normal paradigm.